The moving truck rumbled down Maple Ridge Drive, its massive frame casting long shadows across the immaculate lawns that lined both sides of the street. Inside the cab, Marcus Thompson gripped the steering wheel with both hands, his knuckles lighter against his dark skin as he navigated the unfamiliar roads of Willowbrook Estates. "Daddy, is this really where we're gonna live?" His daughter Zoe pressed her face against the passenger window, her 8-year-old eyes wide with wonder at the sprawling houses and manicured hedges. Marcus glanced at her reflection in the glass, seeing the hope that sparkled there. "This is it, baby girl, our new home." Behind them, his wife Denise followed in their Honda Accord, their 13-year-old son Jalen in the passenger seat beside her, his headphones on, pretending not to care about this massive change in their lives. The neighborhood was everything they'd dreamed of when they'd first started saving money 15 years ago, back when Marcus was still working 2 jobs while finishing his engineering degree at night school. Back when Denise was waiting tables during the day and studying for her nursing certification after Zoe went to sleep. They'd sacrificed vacations, new cars, restaurant meals, everything that their friends seemed to take for granted. And now, finally, they were here. The GPS announced their arrival, and Marcus pulled the moving truck to a stop in front of a beautiful 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. The previous owners had left the flower beds meticulously maintained, and a large oak tree in the front yard promised shade in the summer months ahead. "This is it," Marcus whispered to himself, hardly believing it was real. Denise pulled up behind him, and he watched through his mirror as she stepped out of the car, her hand rising to cover her mouth as she took in their new home. Even Jalen removed his headphones, his teenage indifference cracking just enough to reveal the excitement underneath. They gathered on the sidewalk, the 4 of them, standing before the house that represented every sacrifice, every late night, every moment of doubt that they'd pushed through together. "We did it, baby," Denise said, threading her fingers through Marcus's. "We really did it." Marcus pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "We did it together." The moment was perfect, absolutely perfect. And then Margaret Hoffman stepped out of the house next door. She was perhaps 65, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She wore a cream-colored blouse tucked into khaki pants, and she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to being in charge. Margaret stopped at the edge of her lawn, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the Thompson family. Her gaze traveled from Marcus to Denise, then to the children, and finally to the moving truck. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice carrying across the lawn with practiced authority. Marcus smiled, his natural warmth pushing past his initial unease. "Good afternoon. We're the Thompsons. We just bought this house." Margaret's expression flickered, something passing behind her eyes too quickly for Marcus to identify. "Bought this house? I wasn't aware it had sold." "Just closed last week," Marcus said, still maintaining his friendly demeanor. "The Hendersons wanted a quick sale before they moved to Florida." "I see." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, I'm Margaret Hoffman, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. We have certain standards here that all residents are expected to maintain." Denise stepped forward, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Hoffman. We're really excited to be part of this community." Margaret looked at Denise's outstretched hand for a moment too long before taking it briefly. "Yes, well, I'm sure you'll want to familiarize yourself with our HOA guidelines. We take our covenant very seriously here." "Of course," Marcus said. "We received all the documentation from the real estate agent. We've already reviewed everything." "Have you?" Margaret's eyebrow arched slightly. "Then you'll know that moving trucks are only permitted between the hours of 9 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. It's currently 4:17. Marcus felt Denise's hand tighten in his. He glanced at his watch, seeing that Margaret was technically correct. "I apologize for that," Traffic from the city was worse than we expected. We'll work as quickly as we can to get everything inside. See that you do. Noise ordinances begin at 8 o'clock sharp. Margaret turned to leave, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. Oh, and welcome to the neighborhood. The words held no warmth. As Margaret disappeared back into her house, Zoe tugged at Marcus's sleeve. Daddy, why was that lady looking at us funny? Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level, forcing a smile onto his face. She's just being careful, sweetie. She doesn't know us yet. Once she sees what good neighbors we are, everything will be fine. But even as he said the words, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much more complicated than he'd anticipated. That night, after the furniture was roughly in place and the children were settled in sleeping bags in their new rooms, Marcus and Denise sat together on the porch swing, looking out at their new street. "Did you see the way she looked at us?" Denise asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper in the evening air. Marcus nodded, not pretending he didn't know what she meant. "I saw. I thought I hoped that out here in the suburbs things would be different, that the kids could grow up without having to deal with—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus pulled her closer. "We belong here, Denise. We worked for this. We earned it. Whatever prejudices Margaret Hoffman or anyone else might have, we're not going anywhere. This is our home." Denise rested her head against his shoulder. "I know, I just wanted it to be easier, for them at least." Through the window, they could see Jalen's silhouette moving in his room. At 13, he was old enough to have already experienced the subtle and not-so-subtle ways the world treated him differently because of his skin color. Marcus had had those painful conversations with him, the ones every black father dreads having with his son, the rules for how to interact with police, the extra care he needed to take in stores, the awareness he always had to maintain of how his presence might be perceived. Marcus had hoped that in a neighborhood like this, Jalen might get a brief respite from all of that, a chance to just be a kid. But looking at the way Margaret Hoffman had stared at them, he wasn't so sure anymore. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking boxes and getting settled. Marcus had arranged to start his new position at Henderson Engineering the following Monday, which gave him time to help Denise organize the house, while also exploring the neighborhood. Willowbrook Estates was beautiful, he had to admit. The community center had a pool, tennis courts, and a playground that made Zoe's eyes light up. The local elementary school was just a 10-minute walk away, and the middle school where Jalen would be starting in the fall was only slightly farther. But something felt off. Whenever Marcus walked down the street, he noticed the way some neighbors watched him from behind their curtains, the way conversations stopped when he approached the community center, the way other joggers suddenly crossed to the opposite side of the path when they saw him running in the morning. He tried to shake it off, told himself he was being paranoid, that moving to a new place was always awkward at first. Then the letter arrived. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, addressed to current resident at their address. Marcus opened it at the kitchen table while Denise prepared lunch. "What is it?" she asked, noting the furrow in his brow. Marcus read aloud, "Dear resident, it has come to the attention of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association that your property is currently in violation of several community covenant provisions, specifically Section 4.2 regarding lawn maintenance, specifically grass height exceeding 3 inches. Section 7.1 regarding exterior modifications, specifically unapproved basketball hoop installation. Section 9.3 regarding vehicle restrictions, specifically commercial vehicle parking on residential property. You are hereby required to remedy these violations within 7 days, or face fines, as outlined in the HOA Covenant Agreement. Sincerely, Margaret Hoffman, HOA President." Denise set down the knife she'd been using to slice tomatoes. "Basketball hoop? We don't have a basketball hoop." "I know." And the lawn. Marcus, you mowed the lawn 2 days ago. It looks perfect. I know. And commercial vehicle? We don't own a commercial vehicle. Marcus set the letter down on the table, staring at it like it might suddenly make sense. I think maybe Margaret came by while you were at the store yesterday and saw the Home Depot truck in the driveway, the one making the delivery for the bathroom renovation supplies. But that was a delivery. It was here for 20 minutes. I don't think accuracy is really the point here, Denise. She came around the kitchen island and picked up the letter, reading it again for herself. This is harassment, plain and simple. Maybe, or maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Let me go talk to her, clear things up. Denise grabbed his arm as he stood. Marcus, be careful. Women like her, they're not used to being challenged, and they have ways of making trouble for people. He covered her hand with his. I'll be polite, professional. I've been dealing with people like Margaret Hoffman my whole career. I know how to handle it. But as he walked across the lawn to Margaret's front door, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Margaret answered on the third knock, her expression shifting from neutral to guarded the moment she saw who was standing on her porch. Mr. Thompson, how can I help you? Marcus held up the letter, keeping his voice calm and friendly. Good afternoon, Mrs. Hoffman. I received this notice from the HOA, and I think there might have been some confusion I'd like to clear up. Confusion? Yes, ma'am. The letter mentions a basketball hoop, but we haven't installed one. And the commercial vehicle it references was actually a delivery truck that was only here briefly while they dropped off some supplies. Margaret's expression didn't waver. The observations were made by our compliance committee during a routine inspection. I assure you there were no mistakes. With all due respect, ma'am, I'm not sure that's accurate. If you'd like to come over right now, I can show you that there's no basketball hoop anywhere on the property. The inspection was conducted according to our standard procedures. If you wish to dispute the findings, you'll need to submit a formal appeal to the HOA board in writing. The process is outlined in Section 12 of the Covenant Agreement. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his composure. Mrs. Hoffman, I'm trying to handle this neighborly, face-to-face. I don't want to start our relationship off with formal appeals and disputes. And then I suggest you remedy the violations within the stated time frame. Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson. She began to close the door, but Marcus stepped forward, placing his hand against it. Margaret's eyes widened, and something that looked almost like fear flickered across her face. Marcus immediately stepped back, raising both hands. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I just wanted to finish our conversation. But Margaret was already reaching for her phone. I think you need to leave my property now, Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Hoffman, please, I'm just trying to talk to you.
I'm calling the police.
Marcus stared at her, disbelief washing over him. The police, because I wanted to discuss a letter. You put your hands on my door aggressively. I felt threatened. I did not. That's not what happened. Please leave my property immediately, or I will have no choice but to report this incident. Marcus backed down the porch steps, his heart pounding in his chest. This is a misunderstanding, Mrs. Hoffman. That's all this is. But Margaret had already closed the door. Marcus stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. A simple conversation about lawn maintenance had somehow escalated to threats of police involvement in less than 5 minutes. When he got home, Denise took one look at his face and knew something had gone wrong. What happened? Marcus told her everything, watching her expression shift from concern to anger to something that looked a lot like fear. She threatened to call the police for what? She said I was aggressive, that she felt threatened. Denise's hands were shaking as she poured herself a glass of water. Marcus, do you understand what could happen if she actually calls them? If she tells them a black man was aggressive at her door? I know, baby, believe me, I know. We need to document everything, every interaction, every letter, every time she looks at you sideways. We need records. Marcus nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Jalen, who had already experienced being followed around stores by security guards. About Zoe, who was still innocent enough to believe the world was fair. About what it would mean for them to grow up in a neighborhood where they were seen as threats simply for existing. He had thought they were buying a house. Instead, they had apparently purchased a battleground. 2 days later, the police arrived. It was a Saturday morning, and Marcus was in the garage, organizing boxes of Christmas decorations they hadn't gotten around to unpacking. Denise was inside with the kids, making pancakes for breakfast. The knock on the front door was firm and official sounding. Denise answered it to find 2 officers standing on their porch. One was young, maybe 25, with blonde hair and a nervous energy about him. The other was older, mid-40s, with a weathered face and calm, assessing eyes. "Good morning, ma'am," the older officer said. "I'm Officer Patterson. This is Officer Reeves. We received a complaint about the residents at this address." Denise felt her stomach drop. A complaint? What kind of complaint? "Ma'am, is your husband home?" Before Denise could answer, Marcus appeared behind her, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd heard the word police and immediately come inside. "I'm Marcus Thompson. What seems to be the problem, officers?" Officer Patterson's eyes traveled over Marcus. Assessing him in that way, Marcus had experienced his entire life. "Mr. Thompson, we received a call from a neighbor alleging some suspicious activity. Would you mind stepping outside so we can have a conversation?" "Suspicious activity? We've been unpacking boxes all morning." "Sir, please step outside." It wasn't a request. Marcus exchanged a look with Denise, seeing the fear in her eyes. He gave her a small nod, trying to communicate that everything would be okay, even though he wasn't sure that was true. He stepped onto the porch, keeping his hands visible at his sides. "What exactly is this about, officer?" Patterson pulled out a small notebook. "We received a report that individuals matching your description were seen casing houses in this neighborhood. Looking in windows, checking door handles, that sort of thing." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Casing houses? I've been in my garage all morning. My wife has been cooking breakfast. Our children are inside." "Do you have any identification, sir?" "You want to see my ID at my own house?" "Sir, we're just trying to verify the situation. A simple ID check and we can be on our way." Marcus took a deep breath, forcing down the anger that was building in his chest. He knew the script. He'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in his head, ever since his father had first explained to him how to survive encounters like this one. "Stay calm, be polite. Don't make any sudden movements. Don't give them any excuse." "My wallet is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it slowly. Is that okay?" Patterson nodded. Marcus retrieved his wallet, moving with exaggerated slowness, and handed over his driver's license. Patterson examined it, then looked at the house number, then back at the license. "Mr. Thompson, this address doesn't match the one on your license." "We just moved here last week. I haven't updated my license yet." "I see. Do you have any documentation proving you live at this address?" Marcus felt something snap inside him. Years of similar encounters, of being questioned and doubted and suspected simply for the color of his skin, rose up like a wave he could no longer hold back. "Documentation? You want documentation proving I live in my own house?" "Sir, there's no need to raise your voice." "I'm not raising my voice. I'm asking a question. What documentation do you need? Should I show you my deed, my mortgage papers, my utility bills? What piece of paper will satisfy you that I have the right to exist in this neighborhood?" Officer Patterson's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down." "I am calm. I'm a homeowner standing on my own property being asked to prove I belong here because some neighbor decided I looked suspicious while unpacking boxes in my garage." Denise appeared in the doorway, her phone held up and obviously recording. "Officers, Am I correct in understanding that you came to our home based on a complaint that my husband was casing houses while he was inside his own garage? Patterson turned to her, noting the phone. Ma'am, please put the phone away. I have every right to record interactions with police officers in public spaces. This is a public sidewalk and my private property. I'm not putting anything away. The younger officer, Reeves, shifted uncomfortably. Rich, maybe we should... Patterson held up a hand. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, we're going to need to verify your residency before we can clear this call. Do you have any documentation inside the house? Marcus was about to respond when a voice cut through the tension. Marcus, what's going on here? They all turned to see an older black man approaching from down the street. He was perhaps 65, with grey at his temples and a distinguished bearing. He wore a golf polo and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. Marcus didn't recognize him, but Denise did. Mr. Coleman? The man smiled warmly. Denise, good to see you again. Is there a problem here, officers? Patterson looked between Coleman and the Thompsons. And you are? James Coleman. I live at the end of the block, number 42. I've been on the Willowbrook Estates HOA board for 15 years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. I'm also a retired federal judge, District Court of the Eastern District. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Reeves actually took a step back. Patterson looked at the card, then at Coleman, then at Marcus. Judge Coleman, we were just responding to a complaint.
What kind of complaint?
Suspicious activity. Someone reported individuals casing houses in the area. Coleman's expression darkened. Suspicious activity, let me guess. That complaint came from Margaret Hoffman? Patterson's silence was answer enough. Coleman nodded slowly. Officers, I can personally vouch for the Thompson family. They purchased the Henderson property last week. Good people. Mr. Thompson is an engineer. His wife is a nurse. They have 2 lovely children. They are exactly the kind of family this neighborhood should welcome. Sir, we still need to verify. You need to verify nothing. These people are homeowners, standing on their own property, being harassed by a neighbor with too much time on her hands and too little tolerance for anyone who doesn't look like her. Coleman stepped closer to Patterson, lowering his voice. I know Margaret Hoffman. I know how she operates. And I can tell you right now that if this continues, it won't be the Thompson family facing consequences. Are we clear? Patterson held Coleman's gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Crystal clear, Your Honor. Good. Then I suggest you close out this call and have a conversation with Mrs. Hoffman about filing false reports. I believe that's still a crime, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Then I think we're done here. Patterson and Reeves retreated to their cruiser, and within minutes they were gone. Marcus let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for an hour. Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. Coleman waved off the gratitude. Call me James, and don't thank me yet. Margaret Hoffman isn't going to stop just because the police left. If anything, she's probably already planning her next move. Denise stepped off the porch to join them. James, why is she doing this? We haven't done anything to her. Coleman's expression was sad. You don't have to do anything, Denise. For people like Margaret, your existence here is the offense. You represent change, progress, the slow erosion of the world she thinks she's entitled to. He paused, looking at their house. When I moved here 30 years ago, I was the first black family in Willowbrook Estates. The things they did to try to drive us out. Well, that's a story for another time. But I stayed. My wife and I raised 3 children here, and now, slowly but surely, this neighborhood is starting to reflect what America actually looks like. Margaret can't stand that. Marcus felt a heavy weight settling in his chest. So what do we do? How do we fight back without putting our family at risk? Coleman smiled. But there was steel beneath the warmth. You document everything, every interaction, every letter, every sideways look. You build your case and you build your community. You reach out to the neighbors who aren't like Margaret, because I promise you they exist, and when the time comes, you stand your ground. And if that's not enough, Coleman's smile widened. Then you do what I did. You take it to court and you win. The following week, Marcus returned to work, starting his new position at Henderson Engineering. The company had recruited him specifically for their new sustainable infrastructure division, and his expertise in structural engineering made him a valuable asset. His boss, a jovial white man named Frank Henderson, had been genuinely enthusiastic about having Marcus join the team. The work itself was challenging and rewarding, exactly the kind of career opportunity Marcus had been working toward his entire life. But even at work, he couldn't fully escape the shadow of what was happening at home. Every day, Denise sent him updates. Another letter from the HOA about their garbage cans being visible from the street. A complaint about their children making too much noise in the backyard. A notice informing them that their fence was 2 inches higher than regulations allowed. Each accusation was more absurd than the last. Each one was documented meticulously, and each one made Marcus feel like the walls were slowly closing in. On Thursday, Denise called him at work, her voice trembling. "Marcus, something happened." His heart stopped. "Are the kids okay?" "They're fine. They're inside, but someone egged our car last night while it was in the driveway and—" She paused, struggling to get the words out. "Someone spray-painted something on our garage door." "Spray-painted what?" A long silence, then so quietly he almost couldn't hear her. "Go home." Marcus closed his eyes. "I'm leaving now." "Marcus, wait, there's more." "What?" Margaret Hoffman called the police again. She reported vandalism to her own property and tried to say she saw Jalen sneaking around last night. The officers came by to question him. "They questioned our 13-year-old son without us present. I was here. I didn't let them talk to him alone. But Marcus, the way they looked at him, our baby." Marcus gripped the phone so hard he heard the plastic creak. "Don't let anyone else in the house. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be there in 30 minutes. He was there in 22. The spray paint had already been partially scrubbed away by the time he arrived, but Marcus could still make out the 2 words that had been written in bright red letters. "Go home." Denise was sitting on the porch steps, Jalen beside her. The boy's face was a mask of controlled anger, but Marcus could see the fear underneath. The fear of a child who had just learned that the safe world his parents had tried to create for him didn't actually exist. Zoe was inside with James Coleman, who had come over as soon as he'd heard what happened. The older man had made it his mission to shield the little girl from as much of this ugliness as possible. Marcus sat down on the other side of his son, putting his arm around the boy's shoulders. "You okay?" Jalen shrugged, not looking at him. "I'm fine." "It's okay if you're not fine. I'm not fine either." Jalen was quiet for a moment, then, "Dad, why does she hate us so much? What did we do?" Marcus had known this question was coming, had dreaded it, had hoped he would have more time before his son had to confront this particular truth about the world. "You didn't do anything, son. Neither did I or your mom or your sister. Some people, they're afraid of anyone who's different from them. And when people are afraid, sometimes they act in ugly ways. But why are they afraid of us? We're not scary." "No, we're not. But fear doesn't always make sense. It gets passed down from parents to children, generation after generation. And if nobody ever challenges it, it just keeps going." Jalen looked up at him, his eyes glistening. "Is that why you and Mom always tell me to be careful, to not run in stores, to keep my hands visible when I talk to adults?" Marcus felt his heart break. "Yes, son, that's why." "That's not fair." "No, it's not. It's not fair at all." Marcus pulled his son closer. But here's what I need you to understand, Jalen. We're not going anywhere. This is our home. We bought it with money we earned through hard work and sacrifice. No spray paint, no letters, no police visits are going to change that. We belong here, and we're going to prove it.
How?
Marcus looked at the garage door, at the fading evidence of hatred that someone had left in the night. By living our lives with dignity, by being the best neighbors anyone could ask for, by refusing to let fear or hatred define who we are. He felt Denise's hand slip into his. And if that doesn't work? Jalen asked. Marcus exchanged a look with his wife. Then we fight with everything we've got. That night, after the children were in bed, Marcus and Denise sat at the kitchen table with James Coleman, reviewing everything they had documented over the past 2 weeks. The pile was substantial: letters from the HOA, photographs of each alleged violation showing that none of them were real, records of police visits with dates and times, statements from neighbors who had witnessed Margaret's behavior, the spray-painted message, photographed before it was cleaned. "You have a solid foundation here," James said, leafing through the documents. "But I want to be honest with you. These cases are hard to win. Margaret is smart. She knows how to operate within the rules, or at least make it look like she is." "So what do we do?" Denise asked. "We need to prove a pattern of discriminatory behavior. One incident can be explained away. A dozen incidents start to look like something else entirely." James pulled out one of the HOA letters. "Have you compared the complaints you've received to complaints filed against other residents?" Marcus shook his head. "How would we even get that information?" "As homeowners and HOA members, you have the right to review all HOA records, including complaint logs and fine assessments. It's in the covenant, Section 15. James smiled slightly. "I helped write that section, actually." Denise leaned forward. "You think Margaret has been treating us differently than other residents?" "I know she has, because I've been watching her operate for 3 decades, and I have my own records." James pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "When I first moved here, I kept every letter, every complaint, every snide remark. I documented everything, just like you're doing now, and do you know what I found?" Marcus and Denise waited. "I found that in the first year I lived here, I received 14 HOA complaints. The average for new residents that year, 2. The following year, after I started pushing back, I received 23 complaints. The average, still 2. James spread out his papers on the table. "Over 30 years, I've accumulated over 300 documented instances of unequal treatment, some of them small, some of them not so small, and I never did anything with them because I was tired. I just wanted to live my life." He looked up at Marcus and Denise, his eyes sharp despite his age. "But you two are young, you have energy, and you have something I never had." "What's that?" Marcus asked. "You have me, and 30 years of evidence that proves this isn't just about you. It's a pattern, a systematic effort to make this neighborhood hostile to anyone who doesn't fit Margaret Hoffman's vision of what a proper resident looks like." Denise reached across the table and squeezed James's hand. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." James covered her hand with his. "Because someone should have helped me, because my children grew up here, and my grandchildren visit here, and I don't want any of them to go through what I went through." He paused. "And because I'm tired of watching Margaret Hoffman win." The plan was simple: request access to all HOA records and conduct a comprehensive review of complaint patterns over the past decade. Look for statistical evidence that certain residents were being targeted while others were given passes for the same violations. Marcus submitted the formal request the following Monday. The response came 2 days later. "Dear Mr. Thompson, your request to access HOA records has been reviewed by the board. Due to privacy concerns regarding other residents, we are unable to release complaint logs, fine assessments, or disciplinary records. If you have specific questions about your own account, please contact the HOA office during business hours. Sincerely, Margaret Hoffman, HOA President. Marcus stared at the letter, fury building in his chest. She can't do this. The covenant specifically says residents have the right to review records. James nodded, unsurprised. She knows that. She's counting on you not knowing it, or not wanting to push back. So we push back. Exactly. I've drafted a response for you. James handed him another document. It cites the specific covenant provisions guaranteeing access, the relevant state laws governing HOA records, and the potential legal consequences of continued obstruction. Denise read over the letter, her eyebrows rising. James, this is aggressive. It's supposed to be. Margaret understands one thing: power. You have to show her that you're not going to be bullied, that you know your rights and you're willing to fight for them. Marcus signed the letter and mailed it that afternoon. 3 days later, they received a response informing them that their request had been approved. They could review the records at the HOA office the following Tuesday, between the hours of 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Marcus took the day off work. Denise arranged for a neighbor, a kind woman named Susan, who had been quietly supportive since they moved in, to watch the kids. And together, they walked into the Willowbrook Estates HOA office, ready to find the truth. The office was located in a small building near the community center, staffed by a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who seemed nervous about their presence. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Hoffman mentioned you might be stopping by. Patricia's eyes darted around the room. The records are in the conference room. You have 2 hours. Thank you, Denise said politely. The records were extensive. Boxes of files going back 20 years, organized by address. Marcus and Denise split up the work, each taking a stack of files and methodically reviewing the contents. What they found was damning. Over the past decade, the Thompson house, previously owned by the Hendersons, had received a total of 3 HOA complaints. All 3 were minor and had been resolved without fines. In contrast, James Coleman's property had received an average of 12 complaints per year. Nearly all of them cited violations that, when Marcus cross-referenced with other files, had been ignored when committed by white residents. But it got worse. Marcus found a file for a family named Rodriguez, who had lived in the neighborhood 5 years ago. They had received 27 complaints in their first year alone. The file included correspondence showing that they had eventually sold their house and moved away. Another file for a family named Washington, 31 complaints over 2 years. They had also sold and left. Another file for a family named Patel, 40 complaints in 18 months, same result. Denise looked up from her own stack of files, her face pale. Marcus, look at this. She handed him a document. It was an internal memo dated 3 years ago from Margaret Hoffman to the HOA board. It read, "Board members, as discussed at our last meeting, we need to be more proactive about maintaining the character of our community. Property values depend on attracting the right kind of residents. I am proposing we increase our compliance monitoring efforts, focusing particularly on properties that have recently changed hands or are occupied by tenants. I trust you understand my meaning. Regards, Margaret." Marcus read it twice, his hands shaking. She put it in writing. She actually put her intentions in writing. "She never thought anyone would see this," Denise said. "She thought she was untouchable." "Not anymore." They spent the remaining time photographing every relevant document, complaint logs, fine assessments, the memo, evidence of selective enforcement going back years. When they walked out of the HOA office, they had everything they needed. That evening, they gathered at James Coleman's house to review their findings. His wife, Eleanor, served coffee and sandwiches while they spread the documents across the dining room table. "This is bigger than I thought," James murmured, reading through the memo. "She's been doing this for years, systematically driving out any family that doesn't fit her vision." "Why didn't anyone stop her?" Denise asked. "Because she's smart. She never does anything obviously illegal. She uses the rules, twists them, enforces them selectively, and the people she targets either don't know their rights, don't have the resources to fight, or just give up and leave." James looked up at them. "But you're not going to leave, are you?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're not." "Good, then here's what we're going to do." The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1. Compile all evidence into a comprehensive report documenting the pattern of discriminatory enforcement. Phase 2. Present the findings to the HOA board, demanding Margaret's removal as president. Phase 3. If the board refused to act, file a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority and pursue legal action under the Fair Housing Act. "The key is the board," James explained. "Margaret controls it, but she doesn't own it. There are 5 members, and 3 of them are reasonable people who I believe will do the right thing if presented with irrefutable evidence. We need to give them that evidence in a way they can't ignore." "And if they still side with Margaret?" Denise asked. James's expression hardened. "Then we take it public, media, lawsuits, everything. Margaret's greatest fear is being exposed. She cares more about her reputation than anything else. If we threaten that, she'll fold." Marcus nodded slowly. "When do we start?" "We already have. The report will take a week to compile. I'll handle the legal analysis. You two focus on gathering additional witness statements from neighbors who've experienced similar treatment." James paused. "This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Margaret won't go quietly. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Marcus looked at Denise. She looked back at him. In her eyes he saw exhaustion, fear, determination, and love. "We're ready," they said together. The next 2 weeks were intense. Marcus and Denise reached out to every neighbor who might be sympathetic, gathering stories and statements. Susan, the kind woman who had watched their children, revealed that she had witnessed Margaret making racist comments at an HOA meeting 3 years ago. Another neighbor, Tom, admitted that he had seen Margaret deliberately target minority families but had been too afraid to speak up. James worked tirelessly on the legal report, spending long nights reviewing statutes and precedents. His wife, Eleanor, kept everyone fed and focused, her quiet strength a steadying presence for the entire group. Meanwhile, the harassment continued. Another letter arrived, citing new violations. Someone slashed the tires on Marcus's car. A dead rat was left on their front porch. Jalen came home from school one day with a black eye, refusing to say who had hit him or why. Through it all, the Thompsons held firm. "This is what she wants," Marcus told his family one evening. "She wants us to be so overwhelmed, so exhausted, so afraid that we just give up and leave. But that's not who we are. We're Thompsons. We don't run from bullies." Zoe, sitting on the couch with her stuffed elephant, looked up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy, why are people being mean to us?" Marcus knelt down beside her, his heart aching. "Because they're scared, sweetie. And when people are scared, sometimes they do mean things." "Why are they scared of us?" "They're not scared of us exactly. They're scared of change. They're scared of things being different than what they're used to." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But here's the important thing. We're not going to let their fear make us scared. We're going to be brave, and we're going to show them that different isn't bad. Different is just different." Zoe considered this for a moment. Then she nodded solemnly. "Okay, Daddy, I'll be brave." "That's my girl." Finally, the day of the HOA board meeting arrived. It was held in the community center, in a large room that could seat about 50 people. By the time Marcus and Denise arrived, every seat was full. Word had spread through the neighborhood about what was going to happen. Some people had come to support the Thompsons, others had come to support Margaret, and many had simply come to watch, curious about the drama that had been brewing for weeks. Margaret Hoffman sat at the front of the room, behind a long table with the other 4 board members. She was dressed impeccably, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression serene. If she was nervous about what was coming, she didn't show it. James Coleman entered behind the Thompsons, carrying a thick folder. Eleanor was with him, as were Susan, Tom, and half a dozen other neighbors who had agreed to speak. The room fell silent as they took their seats in the front row. Margaret cleared her throat. "I call this meeting to order. We have several items on the agenda tonight, but I understand that one of our residents has requested time to address the board. Mr. Thompson, you have 10 minutes. Marcus stood, his legs steady despite the tension coursing through his body. He walked to the front of the room and turned to face the audience. "Good evening, my name is Marcus Thompson. My wife Denise and I, along with our children Jalen and Zoe, moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 weeks ago. We came here looking for a safe community where we could raise our family. What we found instead was systematic harassment, discrimination and intimidation." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Margaret's expression remained unchanged. "In the 3 weeks since we arrived, we have received 14 separate complaints from this HOA. 14 complaints about violations that either didn't exist or were so minor that our neighbors routinely commit them without consequence." Marcus held up a stack of papers. "I have documentation proving that every single one of these complaints was fabricated or exaggerated." He set the papers on the table in front of the board members. "But this isn't just about us. With the help of Judge James Coleman, who has lived in this community for 30 years, we conducted a comprehensive review of HOA records going back a decade. What we found is a clear pattern of discriminatory enforcement targeting minority families." Marcus pulled out another document and held it up for everyone to see. "This is an internal memo written by HOA President Margaret Hoffman 3 years ago. In it, she explicitly states that the board should focus enforcement efforts on properties that have recently changed hands, with the goal of maintaining, and I quote, "the character of the community and attracting the right kind of residents." The murmur grew louder. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Margaret's serene expression finally cracked, a flash of anger crossing her face before she regained control. "This memo, combined with the statistical evidence we've gathered, proves that Mrs. Hoffman has been using her position to systematically drive minority families out of this neighborhood. Families like the Rodriguezes, the Washingtons, the Patels. All of them received excessive complaints, all of them were harassed, and all of them eventually left." Marcus turned to face Margaret directly. "Mrs. Hoffman, you don't know us. You've never tried to know us. From the moment we arrived, you decided that we didn't belong here because of the color of our skin. You called the police on us. You filed false complaints. You tried to make our lives so miserable that we would simply give up and go away." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But we're not going away. This is our home. We bought it with money we earned through years of hard work and sacrifice. We have every right to be here, and no amount of harassment is going to change that." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a document. It was folded and worn, the creases deep from being handled countless times. "This is our deed. It has our names on it, Marcus and Denise Thompson. It proves that we own our home, free and clear." He unfolded it and held it up for everyone to see. "And there's nothing you can do about it." The room exploded into noise. Some people applauded, others shouted objections. Margaret's face had gone pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. James Coleman stood and raised his hands, calling for order. Gradually, the noise subsided. "Board members," James said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades on the federal bench, You have a choice to make tonight. You can stand with Mrs. Hoffman and continue the policies that have brought shame to this community. Or you can remove her from her position and commit to treating all residents fairly, regardless of their race, religion, or background. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the 4 other board members. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. I've raised my children here. I've watched it change, grow, evolve, and through it all, I've remained silent about the discrimination I've experienced because I was tired, because I just wanted to live my life in peace. His voice hardened. But I'm not going to be silent anymore, and neither are the Thompsons, and neither are the dozens of other residents who have signed statements supporting our position. He placed a thick stack of papers on the table. These are your neighbors, your friends, people who are tired of living in a community defined by fear and exclusion. James looked directly at Margaret. Mrs. Hoffman, you have spent years weaponizing the rules of this HOA to pursue your own prejudices. You've used your position to bully and intimidate anyone who didn't fit your narrow definition of who belongs here. And you did it all while hiding behind procedures and paperwork, confident that no one would ever call you out. He smiled grimly. You were wrong. Margaret finally spoke, her voice tight with controlled rage. This is slander, defamation. I have served this community faithfully for over a decade. I will not sit here and be accused of... Of what? James interrupted. Of discrimination, of harassment, of systematically targeting minority families. He picked up the memo Marcus had displayed earlier. These are your words, Mrs. Hoffman, written in your own hand, distributed to your board members. There's no hiding from them. One of the other board members, a man named David, leaned forward. Margaret, is this memo authentic? Margaret hesitated. The memo has been taken out of context. I was simply suggesting that we increase our enforcement efforts to maintain property values. There was nothing discriminatory about it. The right kind of residents, David read aloud from the memo. What exactly did you mean by that, Margaret? I meant residents who would contribute positively to the community, who would maintain their properties properly. And the fact that every family driven out by your enforcement efforts happened to be a minority family, that's just a coincidence? Margaret's jaw tightened. Correlation is not causation. I enforce the rules equally against everyone. The records suggest otherwise, James said. The Thompson family received 14 complaints in 3 weeks. The average for new white residents, 1.3. The Rodriguez family received 27 complaints in their first year. The average for white residents that year, 2.1. These are not coincidences, Mrs. Hoffman. This is a pattern. Another board member, a woman named Patricia, spoke up. Margaret, I think perhaps you should step down from this meeting while we discuss the matter. I will not be dismissed from my own board meeting. It wasn't a suggestion, David said quietly. We're going to vote on whether to remove you as president. You can't be present for that discussion. Margaret stared at him, her composure finally cracking. David, we've worked together for 7 years. You know me. You know I would never... I thought I knew you, David said. Now I'm not so sure. The room watched in silence as Margaret gathered her things and walked to the door. She paused at the threshold, turning back to look at Marcus. This isn't over, she said quietly. You've made a powerful enemy tonight, Mr. Thompson. Marcus met her gaze steadily. I'd rather have enemies who hate me for standing up for what's right than friends who accept me because I stayed silent. Margaret's lip curled, and then she was gone. The vote took 15 minutes. 4 in favor of removing Margaret Hoffman as HOA president, 1 abstention. The room erupted in applause. David, who seemed to have naturally assumed leadership in Margaret's absence, banged his gavel for order. The board will appoint an interim president and conduct a full review of our enforcement policies. We commit to treating all residents fairly and equally, regardless of any personal characteristics." He looked at Marcus and Denise. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, on behalf of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, I apologize for what you have experienced. It was wrong, and it should never have happened." Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Denise took his hand and squeezed. "Furthermore," David continued, "all complaints and fines against the Thompson property are hereby dismissed. The board will also be reaching out to former residents who may have been similarly affected to apologize and discuss potential remediation." He looked around the room at the mix of supportive and hostile faces. "I know this is a difficult moment for our community. Change is never easy, but I believe that what happened tonight was necessary, and I hope that moving forward we can build something better together." He banged his gavel one final time. "This meeting is adjourned." The aftermath of the meeting stretched long into the night. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up before now approached the Thompsons with words of support and encouragement. James Coleman was surrounded by people thanking him for his courage. Susan hugged Denise and told her how proud she was to call them friends. But not everyone was supportive. A small group clustered in the corner, shooting hostile glances at Marcus and his family. These were Margaret's loyal followers, people who shared her views, even if they were smart enough not to put them in writing. They didn't approach or confront anyone directly, but their presence was a reminder that the battle wasn't truly over. Margaret herself had disappeared. Someone said they'd seen her car pulling out of the community center parking lot at high speed. Around 11 o'clock, as the crowd finally began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing alone on the front steps of the community center. The night was cool, the stars bright overhead. He could hear crickets singing in the distance and the gentle hum of air conditioning units from nearby houses. Denise appeared beside him, slipping her arm through his. "How are you doing?" "Honestly, I don't know." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Part of me wants to celebrate. We won. We actually won. But another part of me just feels tired and sad." "Sad?" "That it had to come to this. That we had to fight so hard just to be treated like human beings. That our children had to see—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Denise rested her head against his shoulder. "I know, but they also saw something else. They saw us stand up. They saw us refuse to be intimidated. They saw a community come together to do the right thing." She looked up at him. "Those are important lessons too." "I suppose so." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last few cars pull out of the parking lot. "What do you think happens now?" Denise asked. "I don't know. Margaret's not going to just accept this. She's going to be angry, humiliated. She might try to retaliate somehow." "Let her try. We've already proved we're not afraid of her." Marcus smiled slightly. "When did you become such a fighter?" Denise laughed softly. "When someone threatened my family. When someone tried to take away everything we'd worked for." She turned to face him fully. "I've spent my whole life trying to make peace, trying to get along, trying not to make waves. But there's a line, Marcus, and when someone crosses it, you have to push back." "I'm proud of you, you know that?" "I'm proud of us." She kissed him gently. "Now come on, the kids are at Eleanor's. Let's go home and try to get some sleep." They walked home hand in hand through streets that felt different now, lighter somehow, less hostile. It was just a neighborhood, just houses and lawns and sidewalks, but tonight it felt like something more. It felt like a beginning. The next morning, Marcus woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom curtains. For the first time since they'd moved in, he didn't feel the knot of dread in his stomach. The constant background anxiety that had become his companion over the past few weeks was simply gone. Denise was already up, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Marcus showered, dressed, and headed downstairs to find his wife reading something on her phone, a complicated expression on her face. "What is it?" She handed him the phone. It was a local news website with a headline that made his eyebrows rise. "Shaw President ousted after discrimination allegations." The article was brief but accurate, summarizing the events of the previous night. It mentioned the memo, the statistical evidence, the testimonies of residents. It did not mention the Thompsons by name, but it was clear to anyone who knew the situation who was involved. "How did this get out so fast?" Marcus asked. "Tom, he texted me this morning, said he has a friend who's a reporter at the local paper." Denise smiled slightly. He thought it was important for people to know what happened. Marcus read through the article again, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. On one hand, public exposure was a powerful tool. It would make it harder for Margaret or her supporters to spin what had happened or seek quiet revenge. On the other hand, he hadn't anticipated becoming part of a news story. "How do you feel about this?" he asked Denise. She considered the question carefully. I think it was going to come out eventually anyway. And honestly, maybe it's better this way. The more people who know the truth, the harder it is for anyone to pretend it didn't happen." Marcus nodded slowly. "I should call Frank at work. Let him know what's going on before he hears about it from someone else." His boss's reaction was better than Marcus had hoped. "I saw the article this morning," Frank said. "I want you to know, Marcus, that Henderson Engineering stands behind you completely. What that woman did was wrong, and I'm glad the community took action." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." "You need any time off to deal with fallout or whatever?" Marcus thought about it. Maybe a day or two. Things are still settling down. "Take the week, paid. You've earned it." When Marcus hung up, he found Denise watching him with a surprised smile. "Paid week off? Frank's a good man." "There are good people everywhere, Marcus. We just had the bad luck to live next door to one of the worst." She paused. "Speaking of which, have you noticed? Margaret's house has been completely dark since last night. No car in the driveway either." Marcus looked out the window, across the lawn to Margaret's property. Denise was right. The house that had been a source of constant surveillance and hostility now seemed abandoned. "You think she left?" "I don't know. Maybe she's staying with someone else until things calm down." Denise's expression hardened. "Or maybe she's planning something. Let's not borrow trouble. Whatever she's doing, we'll deal with it when the time comes." The week that followed was surprisingly peaceful. The new interim HOA president, David, made a point of stopping by the Thompson house to personally apologize again and assure them that the board was committed to fair treatment going forward. He also mentioned that they were exploring the possibility of reaching out to the Rodriguez, Washington, and Patel families to offer formal apologies and potentially some form of compensation for what they had experienced. Several neighbors who had never spoken to them before now waved or stopped to chat when they saw Marcus or Denise outside. Some were genuinely friendly. Others seemed to be making an effort to be seen as not racist, which was awkward, but at least represented progress of a sort. James Coleman stopped by daily, partly to check in, and partly because he'd formed a genuine friendship with the Thompson family. Eleanor always sent him with food, claiming that Denise was too skinny and the children needed proper meals. Jalen's black eye faded, and he seemed to be standing taller, walking with more confidence. When Marcus asked him about school, he admitted that the kid who had hit him, a boy named Tyler, whose parents were among Margaret's supporters, had actually apologized. "He said his dad made him," Jalen said, his tone suggesting he wasn't sure whether to believe it. "But whatever, at least it stopped." Even Zoe seemed happier. She had made friends with a girl named Emma, who lived 2 streets over, and the two of them spent hours playing in the backyard, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. It was, Marcus thought, everything they had hoped for when they first decided to move here. A safe neighborhood, friendly community, room for the kids to grow. The only shadow hanging over them was Margaret Hoffman, who remained conspicuously absent. Her house stayed dark, her car stayed missing, and nobody seemed to know where she had gone. Then, on Friday evening, there was a knock at the door. Marcus opened it to find a police officer standing on the porch. It was Officer Patterson, the same man who had responded to Margaret's initial complaint weeks ago. "Mr. Thompson." "Officer Patterson." A moment of uncomfortable silence. "May I come in? There's something I need to tell you." Marcus hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course. He led Patterson to the living room, where Denise was already waiting, having heard the exchange. The children were upstairs, doing homework. Patterson removed his hat and sat down heavily on the couch. He looked tired, Marcus noticed, tired and troubled. "I owe you both an apology," Patterson said, not meeting their eyes. "When I came to your house that first time, I knew the complaint was probably bogus. I've dealt with Margaret Hoffman before, but I followed procedure anyway because that's what we do." He finally looked up. "I should have pushed back harder. I should have questioned the complaint more thoroughly. I should have recognized what was happening and put a stop to it instead of making you feel like criminals in your own home." Marcus and Denise exchanged glances. "Why are you telling us this now?" Marcus asked. Patterson sighed. "Because Margaret Hoffman was arrested this morning." The shock hit like a physical blow. "Arrested? For what?" "Turns out the vandalism to your property wasn't random. She hired someone to do it, young guy from a few towns over. He got picked up on an unrelated charge and decided to talk." Patterson shook his head. "She also made threats against Judge Coleman and at least 2 members of the HOA board. Apparently she's been calling them, sending messages, promising to make their lives hell." Denise pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God!" "She's being held on multiple charges: harassment, conspiracy to commit vandalism, criminal threats. Her lawyer's trying to get bail, but given her behavior since the arrest, I don't think the judge is going to be sympathetic." Marcus sat down slowly, processing the information. "So it's really over?" "I think so, yeah. At least as far as Margaret's concerned. There may still be some of her supporters around, but without her organizing them, I don't think they'll do much." Patterson stood, replacing his hat. "Anyway, I wanted you to hear it from me, and to say I'm sorry. For all of it." He headed toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Thompson, I think what you did was brave. Standing up like that in front of everyone. A lot of people would have just moved away, found somewhere easier. But you didn't." Marcus nodded slowly. "Thank you, officer." Patterson left, and Marcus and Denise sat together in the suddenly quiet living room, trying to absorb what they had just learned. "She actually hired someone to vandalize our home," Denise said softly. "She was that determined to drive us out. And she's paying the price for it now. I should feel happy, vindicated, but I just feel—" Denise searched for the right word. "Sad. Sad that anyone could have that much hatred in their heart. Sad that she wasted so much of her life being afraid of people who were different from her." Marcus pulled her close. "I know, but we can't control what's in other people's hearts. All we can do is control how we respond to it, and we responded with courage and dignity and community. Whatever happens to Margaret Hoffman now, that's on her, not on us." They sat together as the sun set outside, casting long golden shadows across their living room floor. Upstairs, they could hear Jalen's music playing softly and Zoe's voice as she talked to herself while doing her homework. Their family was safe. Their home was secure. Their community had rallied around them. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect, but it was theirs. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the backyard, flipping burgers on the grill, while Zoe and Emma chased each other around the lawn. Jalen was actually socializing with some kids from the neighborhood, laughing at something one of them had said. The backyard was full of people: Susan and her husband, Tom and his wife, the Rodriguez family, who had driven 2 hours to attend after David from the HOA board had tracked them down and invited them personally. Even Officer Patterson was there, off duty, drinking a beer and looking more relaxed than Marcus had ever seen him. James and Eleanor Coleman sat in lawn chairs near the garden, watching the festivities with satisfied smiles. James caught Marcus's eye and raised his glass in a silent toast. Denise appeared beside Marcus at the grill, slipping her arm around his waist. "This is nice." "Yeah, it is. Remember 3 months ago when we were standing on this same lawn, looking at that spray-painted message on our garage?" "I remember." "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" Marcus considered the question. "Honestly, no. I thought we'd probably end up leaving. I thought Margaret would win, and we'd have to start over somewhere else, and the kids would learn that sometimes the bad guys get away with it. But that's not what happened." "No, what happened was we found out that there are more good people in the world than bad ones, that when you stand up for what's right, other people will stand with you, that the way to fight hatred isn't with more hatred, but with community and courage and refusing to be intimidated." Denise smiled up at him. "That's pretty wise, Mr. Thompson." "I have my moments." She laughed and kissed his cheek. "The burgers are burning." Marcus looked down at the grill and swore, quickly rescuing the patties before they were completely charred. Denise returned to the group of women chatting near the patio, her laughter floating back on the warm summer air. Marcus watched his family, his friends, his community gathered together in his backyard, the backyard of the house that he and Denise had worked so hard to buy, the house that they had fought so hard to keep. It hadn't been easy. Nothing worth having ever was, but they had made it. And now, finally, they were home. Later that evening, after most of the guests had gone and the children were inside getting ready for bed, Marcus found himself sitting on the porch with James Coleman. The old judge had a glass of bourbon in his hand and a contemplative expression on his face. "You know," James said, "I've been thinking about something you said at the HOA meeting."
"What's that?"
"That you'd rather have enemies who hate you for standing up for what's right than friends who accept you because you stayed silent." James swirled the bourbon in his glass. "That's a dangerous philosophy." Marcus frowned. "How so?" "Because standing up means making enemies, and enemies can hurt you. They can hurt your family." James looked at him seriously. "What Margaret did was relatively mild, all things considered. Harassment, vandalism, false police reports. But it could have been worse, much worse. Are you prepared for that, for what might happen the next time you decide to stand up?" It was a fair question, and Marcus gave it the consideration it deserved. "I used to think that the safest thing was to keep my head down," he said finally. "To follow the rules, to not make waves, to be so unthreatening that nobody would have any reason to come after me. That's what my father taught me. That's how I survived my first 20 years in the working world." He leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars. "But I've learned something since then. Keeping your head down doesn't actually make you safe. It just makes you invisible. And when you're invisible, you can be erased, like the Rodriguezes, like the Washingtons, like the Patels. They all kept their heads down, and Margaret erased them anyway." "So what's the alternative?" "The alternative is to be visible, to be present, to be so firmly rooted in your community that removing you would be impossible." Marcus smiled slightly. "That's what you did, isn't it? 30 years ago, when you first moved here. You didn't hide. You didn't try to be invisible. You stood your ground and you built relationships and you made yourself indispensable." James chuckled. "I suppose I did, though it didn't feel that noble at the time. Mostly I was just stubborn." "Stubbornness is underrated." "That it is," James finished his bourbon and set the glass aside. "You know, Marcus, when you first moved in, I wasn't sure what to make of you. I'd seen so many families come and go, broken by Margaret and her tactics. I expected you'd be the same. What changed your mind?" "The way you handled that first police visit. Most people, when officers show up at their door asking for ID at their own home, they either get angry or they capitulate. You did neither. You stood firm. You asked questions. You made them explain themselves. You demanded your rights without losing your cool." James nodded approvingly. "That's not easy. Takes a special kind of person." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Thank you, James. That means a lot." "I'm not done." James leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You've won this battle, Marcus. Margaret's gone. The board is reformed. Your family is safe. But the war isn't over. It's never over. There will always be another Margaret, another group of people who want to push you out, another battle to fight." "I know. And are you ready for that? To keep fighting for the rest of your life?" Marcus thought about his children, about the conversations he'd had with Jalen, about how to survive in a world that often saw black men as threats, about the innocence in Zoe's eyes that he desperately wanted to protect, but knew he couldn't shield forever. "I don't think I have a choice," he said. "This is the world we live in. I can either accept it and teach my kids to accept it, or I can fight back and teach them to fight back. And I'd rather they grow up as fighters than as acceptors." James smiled, his weathered face crinkling. "Then you're going to be just fine, Marcus Thompson." The next morning, Marcus was awakened by the sound of his daughter's laughter. He opened his eyes to find Zoe bouncing on the bed, her stuffed elephant clutched in her arms. "Daddy, wake up, there's a surprise outside." Marcus groaned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "What kind of surprise?" "You have to come see." He allowed himself to be dragged out of bed and down the stairs, still in his pajamas. Denise and Jalen were already at the front window, looking out at something in the yard. "What's going on?" Marcus asked. Denise turned to him with tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears, he realized, joyful tears. She stepped aside so he could see. On their front lawn, someone had placed a large wooden sign. It was hand-painted, with colorful letters that read, "Welcome home, Thompsons. We're glad you're here." Around the sign, dozens of flowers had been planted, roses, tulips, daffodils, a riot of color in the early morning light. And on the sidewalk, watching their reaction, were a group of neighbors: Susan, Tom, the Rodriguezes, Officer Patterson, Eleanor Coleman, with James standing behind her, leaning on his cane with a satisfied smile. Marcus felt a lump forming in his throat. He opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, his family gathering behind him. He looked at the sign, at the flowers, at the faces of the people who had come to welcome them. "You didn't have to do this," he managed to say. Susan stepped forward. "Yes, we did. We wanted you to know, really know, that you belong here, that this is your home, that we're your community." The Rodriguezes came forward next. Maria Rodriguez, a warm-faced woman in her 50s, took Denise's hands in hers. "Thank you," Maria said, "for what you did, for standing up. My family left because we didn't have anyone to stand with us. But because of you, maybe the next family will have better luck." Tom cleared his throat awkwardly. "Look, I know I didn't say anything for a long time. I saw what Margaret was doing and I didn't speak up. That was wrong. I was afraid, and I let my fear make me complicit. But I'm not going to be afraid anymore." Officer Patterson stepped forward, looking uncomfortable in his civilian clothes. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, I can't undo what happened, but I can promise that I'll do better going forward, that I'll question complaints that seem suspicious, that I'll treat everyone I encounter with the respect they deserve, that I'll be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." Marcus looked at all of them, these people who had gathered in his front yard on a Saturday morning to make him feel welcome. Some of them had been part of the problem, Some of them had been silent when they should have spoken, but they were here now, trying to do better. And that had to count for something. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all. I don't have the words." "You don't need words," James said from the back of the group. "You just need to keep doing what you've been doing, being good neighbors, being good people, being part of this community." Denise stepped forward, wiping her eyes. "Would everyone like to come inside for coffee? I made fresh biscuits this morning." The group moved toward the house, chatting and laughing, and for a moment Marcus just stood there, watching them go. His wife, his children, his neighbors, his friends, all heading into his house, his home. Jalen appeared at his side. "Pretty cool, huh, Dad?" "Yes, son, pretty cool." "Does this mean we won, like for real?" Marcus put his arm around his son's shoulders. "It means we're winning. Every day we stay here, every friendship we build, every time we refuse to be pushed out, we're winning. It's not always going to be easy. There will still be people who don't want us here, but we're not alone anymore, and that makes all the difference." They walked into the house together, into the warmth and laughter of their gathered community. Behind them, the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long golden rays across the lawn, illuminating the sign that proclaimed their welcome. It wasn't the end of the story. It was never really the end. But it was a good chapter. And sometimes that was enough. In the weeks and months that followed, life in Willowbrook Estates settled into a new normal. The Thompson family became a fixture in the community, known for their warmth, their generosity, and their willingness to stand up for what was right. Marcus threw himself into his work at Henderson Engineering, eventually leading a project to design sustainable, affordable housing for low-income communities. It was work that mattered, work that made a difference, and he found himself more fulfilled than he'd ever been in his career. Denise returned to nursing, taking a position at the local hospital. She specialized in pediatric care, bringing her natural compassion and strength to families facing their most difficult moments. She also started a support group for new residents in the neighborhood, making sure that anyone who moved to Willowbrook Estates felt welcomed and valued from day one. Jalen started high school, where he discovered a passion for debate. He joined the debate team and quickly became one of their star performers, channeling the lessons he'd learned about standing up for himself into a talent for persuasive argument. His coach told Marcus that Jalen had the potential to be a lawyer someday, if he wanted. Zoe continued to light up every room she entered. She made dozens of friends, brought home stray animals that needed rescuing, and announced at age 9 that she was going to be the first black woman president of the United States. Nobody who knew her doubted for a moment that she could do it. The HOA underwent significant reforms under its new leadership. They established a diversity committee, implemented blind complaint review processes, and created a mentorship program pairing new residents with established community members. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. James Coleman passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years after the Thompson family moved in. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including a surprising number of judges, lawyers, and civil rights activists who had been touched by his decades of work. Marcus delivered the eulogy, speaking about the man who had become a mentor, a friend, and a grandfather figure to his children. Margaret Hoffman eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received probation with mandatory community service. Some people thought the punishment was too lenient. Others thought the public humiliation was punishment enough. Marcus tried not to think about her at all. But occasionally, late at night, he would find himself standing at the window, looking out at the neighborhood that had tried so hard to reject him. And he would think about all the people who had lived in this house before him, and all the people who would live here after. This house had stood for 70 years. It had seen families come and go, children grow up and move away, marriages and divorces and births and deaths. It had weathered storms and celebrations, quiet nights and chaotic mornings. And now it was his family's, their home. Not because the neighborhood had welcomed them, not because everything had worked out perfectly, but because they had refused to be driven away. Because they had stood their ground even when it would have been easier to leave. Because this is what home means. Not a place where you're always comfortable, not a place where nothing bad ever happens, but a place where you belong, a place where you've earned your right to stay, a place where you've made your stand. Marcus Thompson had made his stand. And now, finally, he was home. One evening, about 5 years after they first moved to Willowbrook Estates, Marcus was sitting on the porch with his son. Jalen was 17 now, about to start his senior year of high school, already receiving recruitment letters from colleges interested in his academic and debate achievements. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Moving here, I mean, everything we went through?" Marcus considered the question carefully, as he always did with his children. They deserved thoughtful answers, not easy platitudes. "Sometimes," he admitted, "there are moments when I think about how much simpler things would have been if we'd just stayed in the city, or if we'd moved somewhere less complicated. But then I think about what we gained. Not just the house, not just the neighborhood, the lessons, the strength, the community we built." Marcus looked at his son. "You're not the same person you would have been if none of this had happened. You're stronger, more confident, more aware of your power to make change." Jalen nodded slowly. "I think about that a lot, about what happened when we first moved here, about how scared I was." "You were scared?" "Terrified. When those cops came to question me about vandalism, I didn't commit. Dad, I thought my life was over. I thought they were going to arrest me, or worse." Jalen's voice caught. "I thought about all the stories you'd told me, about black boys who got shot by police for doing nothing wrong, and I thought, this is it. This is how it ends." Marcus felt his heart clench. "I didn't know you felt that way." "I didn't want you to know. You and Mom were dealing with so much already. I didn't want to add to it." Jalen looked at his father. "But then something happened. You and Mom didn't back down. You fought, and people fought with you, and the bad guys lost." "The bad guys lost," Marcus repeated softly. "That changed something in me. It made me realize that the fear doesn't have to win, that standing up is possible, that change is possible." Jalen smiled, and Marcus saw a flash of the man his son was becoming. "That's why I want to be a civil rights lawyer, because of what you taught me, both of you." Marcus felt tears pricking at his eyes. "I didn't teach you anything. You learned it yourself, by watching, by experiencing, by surviving. You taught me by example. That's the most powerful teaching there is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk.
"Dad?"
"Yeah?" "Thanks for everything." Marcus put his arm around his son, pulling him close the way he used to when Jalen was small. "Thank you, son, for giving me something worth fighting for." They sat together until the stars came out, a father and son on the porch of their home. The home they had fought for, the home they had earned, the home where they belonged. Not because anyone had given it to them, but because they had claimed it and defended it and refused to let anyone take it away. This was their home, and they were never leaving. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, Denise already asleep beside him, he thought about everything they had been through, the discrimination, the harassment, the fear, the triumph, the years of building community and making change. It had all started with a simple act, buying a house, moving into a neighborhood where people who looked like them weren't supposed to be, refusing to be intimidated when the established order pushed back. He hadn't set out to be an activist. He had just wanted a nice home for his family. But sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes standing up for yourself becomes standing up for everyone. Sometimes a simple act of defiance becomes a movement. Marcus didn't know what the future held. There would be more battles to fight, more injustices to confront, more moments when the easy thing would be to stay silent and the right thing would be to speak up. He didn't know if he would always have the strength to make the right choice. But he knew this: he would try. Every day, in every way he could, he would try to make the world a little bit better than he found it. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through the small acts that add up over time. Being a good neighbor, being a good father, being a good man. And teaching his children to do the same. Because that was the real victory. Not beating Margaret Hoffman, not reforming the HOA, not even staying in their house when so many others had been forced to leave. The real victory was raising children who would carry the fight forward, who would stand up for what was right, even when it was hard, who would build communities of love and acceptance and refuse to tolerate hatred and exclusion. That was a victory that would outlast him, that would outlast all of them. And it had started here, in this house, on this street, in this imperfect but redeemable neighborhood called Willowbrook Estates. Marcus closed his eyes, letting sleep take him. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, new problems to solve, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight he was at peace. He was home, and that was enough.